Reading the Torah is a fascinating endeavor. It's always interesting, riveting, and brings up many different emotions inside of the self. Read the Torah segment a second time over, and it seems to become compelling on a different level. Again and again, the Torah itself seems to morph and change and grow, much in the same way that we do, the reader. Vayera is the name of the Torah portion this week, and it deals with the beginnings of really the Jewish people. For Abraham sitting in the folds of his tent, Be'elonei Mamre, says the Torah, in the terebinths of Mamre. Mamre, because he was a great man that lived in the time of Abraham, and Abraham kind of sought refuge under his shadow, under his wing, and he sat there to learn what is there for us to get from this text, from this small sampling in the terebinths of Mamre. That Abraham didn't think himself worthy, that Abraham didn't think himself anything terribly great or good, anything special. Abraham thought he was simply doing what needed to get done. Much like all of the tzaddikim that have ever lived and walked the face of the earth, they don't realize that they are tzaddikim. And maybe that's the one prerequisite to being a righteous person, that one doesn't presuppose, one doesn't suspect that one is. One is called that by one's peers and by, after one's life, how one is labeled. Abraham surely was a very humble man, much in the same way that the footsteps of all of our forefathers, all of our ancestors were as well. What made them truly great was the fact that they didn't think that they were anything special. Further, Abraham sitting in the folds of his tent, and 3 days after a Brit Milah, a ritual circumcision, when Abraham himself was feeling very ill, not well at all. And to make things even more bizarre, Abraham is speaking to God. Itself not unusual perhaps for a biblical man. But Abraham is speaking to God, and no sooner is he speaking to God, he looks up and he sees some strangers approaching from a distance. Abraham breaks off talking to God and approaches the strangers. Isn't that unusual? Would you distract yourself from a conversation with the master of the universe in order to greet people coming? But Abraham, the righteous one, Abraham the tzaddik, knows what God is really after, and knows what his own soul is about as well. His own soul demands that if somebody is in need, if somebody comes along, he needs to pay them respect. Even breaking off in the middle of a conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to see to the needs of people whom he does not know, does not recognize, that are simply passers-by. True, the markings of a tzaddik are subtle, and they're not perhaps what one would expect, but highly instructive for us in how to better live our lives as guardians of the world in which we live, as compassionate human beings, and as people who truly want to please our Maker. Because when we do, we not only do that, we answer our soul. Wishing you a beautiful Shabbos, an enjoyable week, and finding oneself in the center of black and white letters that swirl about and are the never-ending cause of great learning, conversation, and personal introspection. Shabbat Shalom.